Mindset AI presents The Child of Winterlight, an Elven Tale. The winter had come early that year, hard, icy cold, and heavy with snow. Thomas, a humble woodsman from the outskirts of Same, trudged through the forest with an axe over his shoulder and a scarf wrapped high over his nose. His breath rose like smoke, mingling with the gray sky between the ancient pines. He had lived his whole life in these woods. He knew their ways, their warnings, and their wonders. But nothing in all his years had prepared him for what he found that morning. At first, he thought the faint sound was the whimpering of a fox cub caught in a snare. But as he followed the soft cry through the snow-laden shrubs, he nearly stumbled over the shape lying at the base of a birch tree. A bundle wrapped in a warm blanket, nearly invisible against the drifts. Thomas froze. A child, an infant. He knew about the practice of leaving unwanted children, either born out of wedlock or to families that could not look after them. He was also aware of the legend of Mylings, the spirits of such children, who remained where they had been left to die. They were said to lure unsuspecting humans in order to force them to do their bidding and carry them until they could be buried on hallowed ground. But out here, in such harsh conditions? Heart pounding, he dropped to his knees and lifted the bundle. The child was warm, miraculously warm, despite the deadly cold. Her tiny face poked out from the cloth, serene and pale, framed by hair so silver it shimmered even in the dim winter light. "I will not leave a babe to die in the snow," Thomas muttered to himself. "No one human, at least." He glanced around the trees. No tracks but his own. No sign of a mother, no sign of a struggle, no sign of anything. The snow must have covered them already, which meant that she had been there at least since late the previous night. How had she survived this long? The child opened her eyes. Thomas inhaled sharply. Her irises were not blue, nor gray, nor any color he had ever seen on a human child. They glowed faintly like moonlit ice, an opalescent shimmer, deep and ancient. When she looked at him, it felt less like a child gazing at a stranger, and more like the forest itself was seeing through her. A gust of wind swept through the clearing, whispering in the treetops as though urging him to act. Thomas gathered the child into his arms, tucking her beneath his cloak to shield her from the cold. Whatever she was, whoever she belonged to, she would not die on his watch. His cabin was humble, little more than a single room with a hearth, a bed, and the gentle smell of pine smoke. He laid the infant near the fire, wrapped in a wool blanket, and set about warming milk that he had just taken from his goat in a sheltered pen outside. "This is madness," he muttered to himself as he worked, "bringing a strange child home without a soul to witness it. But what else could I do? Leave you out there?" The infant blinked up at him, wide-eyed and silent. Thomas offered her the milk, expecting the usual fuss of a hungry babe, but she didn't drink. Instead, the milk itself stirred. It brightened, taking on a faint glow, then flowed into her mouth without touching the rim of the cup. Thomas stumbled back, nearly dropping the cup. What in the name of Odin? The child's skin shimmered briefly, just for a heartbeat, revealing delicate markings beneath. Intricate filigree patterns, like frost etched across a window pane. They traced her cheeks, her tiny arms, her brow, and then faded again, leaving her looking as fragile and innocent as before. Thomas sat heavily on the edge of his bed. "You're no human child," he whispered. The infant cooed softly, and in that sound he heard something impossible, a gentle musical resonance, like tiny bells in winter air. Night fell quickly. Snow battered the cabin walls. Thomas dozed in his chair, waking each time the storm howled too loudly. It was near midnight when he sensed a presence, soft, light as drifting snow. He opened his eyes. The child was floating inches above her blanket, wrapped in a halo of pale luminescence. Her eyes were open, glowing like twin moons. For the first time, she truly looked otherworldly. From her tiny lips came a whisper, not in words, but in a melody. A lullaby of wind through branches, of distant stars, of something ancient and sorrowful. And woven into the melody was a sense of gratitude, clear as speech, though no words were used. Thomas found himself speaking aloud, his voice trembling. "You're an elf, a child of the Winterlight." The baby drifted gently back onto the blanket, as if satisfied that he finally understood. Outside, the storm quieted. Inside, Thomas stared at the infant, now sleeping peacefully, as though nothing unusual had occurred. He knew then that his life had changed forever. Whatever fate had brought this child to him, whatever danger or destiny awaited, he had been chosen to protect her. And protect her he would, even if it meant facing the secrets of the ancient forests, opposition from his own kind, or the elves who might come searching. For 3 days, Thomas sheltered the infant in his cabin. Outside, the storm had passed, leaving the forest buried beneath a blanket of white so deep that even the tallest pines groaned under its weight. Yet inside, by the fire's glow, the child thrived. Thomas had taken to calling her Ellen, for the pale light that seemed to cling to her like dawn on a winter morning. She responded to the name with soft, musical murmurs, sounds too pure to belong to the human world alone. But with each passing day, Thomas's unease grew, because beyond the forest, change was sweeping across the land like another kind of winter. Thomas had watched it creep into the village over the last decade, the new church rising where the old sacred grove once stood, the bishop from the southern kingdoms preaching fire and damnation, the hunts for heathen idols. Crosses replaced runestones. Hymns replaced the songs of the skalds. The old gods, once companions of the people, were now whispered of as demons. And worse still were the stories, whispered in fear around hearths, stories of elves. Not as the shining first folk of legend, guardians of forest, light, and truth, but as shape-walking tricksters of the devil's own making. It was said their beauty hid black hearts. Their songs lured men to ruin. Their children carried curses. The same villagers who once left offerings for the Huldra now prayed for protection against them. Thomas had never believed such nonsense. He'd grown up with the older tales, tales his father told by firelight, tales that spoke of elves as beings close to the gods, woven from starlight and ancient purpose. But the new faith had no place for such beings, and now an elven child slept beneath his roof. On the 4th morning before dawn, Thomas woke to the sound of distant voices, muffled, harsh, not the calm tones of hunters or woodsmen, but the clipped certainty of men who believed themselves righteous. He hurried to the window. Down the narrow forest path trudged 3 figures in heavy wool and crosses of blackened iron. The lead man was tall, with a shaved head and a cloak trimmed with wolf fur. Thomas recognized him instantly. Father Eric, a man who spoke softly but carried a heart sharpened like a blade. Beside him walked 2 of the village's younger men, both recently baptized, both eager to prove their newfound zeal. Thomas's stomach nodded. They were headed straight toward his cabin. He rushed to the hearth where Ellen lay in a basket he had woven in haste the day before. She slept peacefully, her silver lashes resting on her cheeks. He touched her brow gently. "Ellen, little one, wake if you can." Her eyes fluttered open, moonlit, shimmering. Thomas whispered, "I need you to hide." In response, Ellen reached up and touched the blanket. Frost spread from her fingertips, weaving into the wool, turning it translucent like crystalline ice. In moments, her small form dimmed and vanished beneath the shimmering veil, still there but invisible, concealed by a magic older than any church. A knock thundered on the door. Thomas swallowed the fear rising in his throat and opened it. Father Eric stepped inside without waiting to be invited. "Thomas the woodsman," he said, eyes cold. "Your neighbors grow concerned. There have been strange lights in these woods. Whispers of a cry, like a child's. We come to investigate." Thomas forced his face into a mask of calm. "I've heard nothing but the wind." Irik's gaze flicked toward the hearth. "You live alone, yet your fire burns as though for two." One of the young men shifted nervously. "Father, the bishop says the forest spirits prowl more boldly during storms. Perhaps one of them has taken refuge here." Irik nodded grimly. An infant's cry was heard by hunters. Not human, not holy, something else. Thomas felt the weight of Ellen's presence behind him, silent, hidden, fragile as frost. He squared his shoulders. "There is no one here but me." Eirik stepped closer, his expression unreadable. "Be warned, woodsman. The devil seeks many forms. The old tales of elves and nature spirits are lies meant to lead good men astray. If any such creature is found," his voice dropped to a chilling whisper, "it must be purged." The father's eyes bored into Thomas's, searching for guilt, searching for fear. Thomas forced himself to hold steady. "You'll find nothing of the sort here." After a long, tense moment, Eirik turned away. "This forest is thick with old darkness. Be vigilant, pray often, and if you see anything unnatural, you will come to us." With that, the three departed, disappearing into the snowy pines. Thomas closed the door and leaned against it, his breath shaking from his chest. Slowly, the frost-woven blanket shimmered and Elin reappeared, gurgling softly as though unaware of how close danger had come. Thomas lifted her into his arms, holding her protectively. "The world has changed, little one," he murmured. "Men no longer see your kind as wonders. They fear what they do not understand, and fear makes men cruel." Elin pressed her tiny hand to his cheek. A warmth spread through him, gentle, comforting, like sunlight trapped in snow. Thomas whispered, voice thick with resolve, "I will not let them take you." The fire crackled softly in answer, as though approving. Outside, the wind carried the distant sound of church bells, cold, sharp, and warning. Inside, an outlawed magic slept in the arms of a man who had just become her only protector. Winter dragged on, deep and relentless. Though the days grew a little longer, the cold seemed only to sharpen. In the village, the church bells tolled more frequently, and the priests warned of omens, unnatural lights, whispers in the snow, and the presence of spirits that walk in the guise of innocence. Thomas knew their message was meant for him. But Elin was growing quickly, far faster than any human infant. Her eyes shone brighter each day, and when she was awake, motes of silver drifted from her like tiny frozen fireflies. She laughed more often now, a soft tinkling sound like a crystal chime. She even began to mimic words in a voice light as morning frost. Thomas adored her, but he was afraid, for the magic that clung to her was becoming harder to conceal. He had fashioned hiding places, beneath the floorboards, inside hollowed logs, behind the furs on the wall. But Elin needed none of them. Her magic was evolving, sharpening, flowering like pale frost beneath moonlight. One evening, as Thomas prepared supper, he glanced toward her cradle and stopped short. She wasn't there. "Elin?" A giggle echoed near the rafters. Thomas looked up. Elin floated upside down near the ceiling, tiny fingers grasping the air as though climbing imaginary branches. When she noticed him looking, she shimmered and vanished completely. A cold trickle ran down Thomas's spine. "Elin, little one, please come back." She shimmered into view again, drifting downward like a dandelion seed, and settled in his arms with a delighted sigh. He held her close, heart pounding. Her invisibility had strengthened, grown fluid, silent, effortless. It was a blessing, and just in time. It happened the next morning. A sound thundered from the front door, not a knock, but a fist striking wood with the authority of men who expected obedience. Thomas froze. A second blow followed. "Woodsman Thomas, open by order of the church and the crown," a familiar voice shouted. Ellen stirred in her blanket, sensing his fear. She blinked, silver eyes widening. Thomas whispered, "Hide, little star, hide now." She touched the blanket, and her form melted into the air. Gone, not even a shimmer left behind. Hard hammering, Thomas opened the door. Father Eirik stood there, snow clinging to his wolf fur cloak. But this time, he was not alone. 6 soldiers in chainmail flanked him, stern men with swords at their belts and crossbows slung over their backs. Eirik's voice was icy calm. There have been more sightings, more omens, lights in the forest, strange sounds. You are too close to all of it, Thomas. He pushed his way inside, without waiting for permission. A soldier followed, then another. Thomas forced steady breathing. There is nothing here but my tools and my fire. The storm plays tricks on minds. Eirik ignored the words. His gaze swept the room with calculated precision. Search, he ordered. The soldiers moved methodically, upending everything, lifting furs, opening chests, striking walls for hollow spaces. One knelt by the cradle. Thomas felt sweat prick the back of his neck. The soldier reached inside, then frowned. Empty, father, nothing. Eirik approached the cradle himself. He ran his fingers along the blankets, then eyed Thomas grimly. Odd, these blankets are warm, as though a child has only just been removed. Thomas steadied his voice. I sleep with extra blankets, father. Winter bites hard. Eirik's cold eyes narrowed. Then, a soft sound wafted through the room. A faint chiming trill, delicate as a snowflake hitting ice. Thomas's blood turned to stone. Eirik's head whipped toward the far corner. What was that? The soldiers raised their crossbows. Thomas stepped between them instinctively. Wind in the eaves, nothing more. Eirik stared at him long and hard. No, that was not the wind. A tense silence stretched, then slowly, the father lowered his hand. Search is complete, one soldier announced. No child, no creature, no one else. Eirik glanced once more around the cabin, then gave a curt nod. Very well, woodsman, but hear my words. Something unnatural is stirring in these woods, and if it is found near you, no mercy will be given. He stepped outside. The soldiers followed. The moment the door shut and the crunch of their footsteps faded, Thomas let out the breath he'd been holding. Elin, he whispered. A sparkle of silver coalesced in the air. Tiny motes glimmered, swirling like snowfall caught in sunlight. Then she appeared, floating before him, her eyes soft and trusting. Thomas embraced her, holding her to his chest. That was too close, little one, he murmured. Much too close. Elin lifted a hand and touched his cheek, a gesture of comfort learned from watching him. Warmth spread through him. She did not speak, but her eyes held understanding far beyond her years. Thomas sat by the fire, Elin cradled in his arms. Outside, distant church bells tolled, their cold notes carrying through the trees like warnings. The search today was only the beginning. Word was spreading, fear was tightening, and men like Father Eirik would not be deterred. Thomas gazed down at the child, the elven child who glowed faintly like a dream. I don't know how long we can stay here, he whispered, but wherever we go, wherever your path leads, I will stand with you. Ellen closed her eyes, leaning into him with complete trust. As winter began to loosen its grip, Thomas made a decision he had long delayed. He could no longer pretend the danger would pass. Not for him, and certainly not for Elin. Father Eirik's search had been too thorough, too eager. The church's fear was escalating into obsession. Before long, someone would notice the strange lights around his cabin, or the odd footprints that sometimes appeared in the snow. Footprints too small, too delicate, too shapeless to be human. Elin was growing stronger. Her magic was no longer something that could be hidden forever. Thomas had only one hope: return her to her own people, if any remained. Because the elves had become scarce in recent years. Whispers said they were withdrawing deeper into the old forests, or vanishing entirely. Others claimed the church had driven them out, hunted them down as abominations. Thomas never believed such horrors, but he had never gone to look for proof himself. He wrapped Ellen in her warmest cloak, an enchanted gift from her own hand, for when she touched the wool, it took on a silver sheen and never chilled. Strapped to his back, she giggled softly, unaware of the dread tightening his chest. The forest south of his cabin grew older, wilder. Trees twisted skyward like ancient guardians. Strange stones jutted from the snow, carved with runes so old no human tongue could read them. Animals watched silently from the shadows, neither approaching nor fleeing, for Ellen's presence calmed them. Thomas felt their eyes on him, but none were hostile. At dusk of the second day, he reached the border stone, an obelisk carved with swirling patterns, half buried in snow. He knew this marker from childhood stories. Beyond it lay Huldrestad, the hidden elven settlement, or what was once Huldrestad. Thomas took a steadying breath and stepped beyond the stone. What greeted him was not the shimmering settlement of legend, not the graceful archways of living wood, not the lanterns of starlight, not the soft music said to echo through its silver halls. Instead, ash, silence, bones. The forest canopy opened into a clearing stripped bare. Charred pillars jutted from the earth like blackened ribs. Structures of once living wood lay collapsed, twisted, murdered by fire. The snow itself seemed afraid to fall here, gathering only in patches as if magic still lingered in the scars. Thomas's breath caught in his throat. He had prepared himself to find emptiness, but not this, not slaughter. Ellen stirred against his back. A soft whimper escaped her. She felt it too. The woodsman moved carefully through the ruins. Beneath the snow, char marks streaked the earth. Trees had been cut violently, hacked with axes rather than shaped by elven craft. Blackened bones lay scattered, too many bones. Some were slender and light, undeniably elven. Others were larger, soldiers perhaps. This had been a battle, but not a fair one. Thomas knelt beside a broken archway, melted by heat no natural fire could produce. Beneath it lay the tiny skeleton of a child, barely older than Elin, his stomach twisted. He whispered, "Gods forgive us." Elin whimpered again, longer this time, higher, trembling. He unfastened her cloak from his back. She did not float now, nor glow. Instead, she extended a tiny hand toward the ruins, her eyes wide with sorrow beyond what an infant should know. Silver motes drifted from her fingers, settling on the nearest fragment of charred wood, and at her touch, the wood flickered. For a moment, just a heartbeat, Thomas saw it as it once was. A graceful arch, alive with leaves that shimmered like spun snow, light dancing in the air like fireflies, laughter, singing, life. Then the vision shattered, disappearing into smoke. Ellen cried, a soft, broken sound that echoed across the ruined village. Thomas held her close, shielding her from the cold and from the nightmare around them. His voice shook. "I'm sorry, little one. I thought perhaps that someone remained, someone who could take you home." But there was no home left, no shelter, no kin, no village. Whatever had happened here, and whoever had done this, they had not intended to leave survivors. Elin pressed her face into his chest, small body trembling. Thomas stood slowly, resolve igniting within him like a spark in dry tinder. "You are all that's left," he whispered, "and I will not let them destroy you too." He gazed at the ruins, at the bones, at the ash, at the silence that throbbed like a wound in the world. Then he turned away. The ruins of Huldrestad haunted Thomas long after he left them behind. As he carried Ellen back through the frozen pines, the air itself felt heavier, thick with sorrow, warning, and an old magic that had been wounded but not destroyed. He did not speak for a long time. Ellen slept fitfully against his chest, tiny fingers clinging to his tunic, soot smudged on her cheek from the ruins. Her silver glow was faint tonight, as though the grief of her people dimmed her light. At last, as the first stars pierced the winter sky, Thomas stopped beside a stream coated in thin ice. The reflection of the sky shimmered like shards of glass. He whispered into the still air, "We cannot stay." The wind carried no argument. He knew the truth now with clarity sharp enough to cut. If the elves had been hunted here, if even their children had been slaughtered, then Ellen would never be safe in Norway. Not while the church seized more power each year, branding anything magical as heresy. Thomas's cabin was no longer a refuge. His homeland was no longer a home, but he was not without allies, for the old ways were not entirely dead. Within the shadows of Norway's fjords and pine forests existed a network, whispered of only in firelit corners, a quiet brotherhood and sisterhood who still honored the gods of their ancestors. Farmers, fishermen, hunters, healers, and wanderers alike. They called themselves Folkets Ånd, the spirit of the folk. Thomas had known them since his youth. His father had trusted them, and Thomas, though not deeply devout, still offered a small carving to Odin and a loaf to Frey once each year. The old gods might have faded from men's tongues, but their followers had not vanished. Instead, they had learned to hide, and they helped any who suffered under the tightening grip of the church. Witches, wise men, runesmiths, unbaptized children, and yes, even those touched by otherworldly magic. Thomas knew where to go. He turned west, toward the old fjord known as Trollvik, where the Folkets Ånd often gathered in secret caves hidden by ancient runes. 3 nights later, exhausted, hungry, and half-frozen, Thomas reached the mouth of the cavern. To an untrained eye, it was nothing but a shadow under a cliff, but Thomas knew better. He lifted a stone. On its underside, carved runes glowed faintly as Elin's presence drew near. The runes recognized her. They guided him. Inside, torchlight flickered along the rocky walls. A dozen figures turned toward him, men and women in furs, leather, and cloaks woven with symbols outlawed by the church. Their faces held suspicion at first. Then they saw Elin in his arms. Gasps rippled through the cavern. A woman with a braided crown of gray hair stepped forward. Her eyes were pale blue, bright with wisdom and fire. "Thomas," she said softly, "the spirits whispered you would come. But I did not expect." Her voice trembled with awe. "An elven child." Thomas bowed his head. "Essie, keeper of the northern flame, I need your help." Essie approached and gently touched Elin's tiny hand. The infant responded, silver sparks dancing between their fingers. "That confirms it," Essie murmured. "She is not only elven, but marked by the old magic, Child of Winterlight." Thomas swallowed. Huldrestad is gone, burned, no survivors. A heavy silence followed, grief, sorrow, anger mixing in the air like smoke. One of the younger men clenched his fists. The church grows bolder. They fear what they cannot control. Another woman spat on the ground. They speak of peace while wielding the sword. Hypocrites. Essie raised a hand for quiet. "This child cannot remain here," she said. "Father Eric already hunts you, and when he finds the ruins of Huldrestad, he will know the elves have been wiped out, save perhaps one." Thomas nodded grimly. "That is why we must leave Norway entirely, for her sake." Essie breathed out slowly, then gave a solemn nod. "Then so be it. Folkets Ånd will aid you." She gestured to the others. "We will provide disguises, a boat, and passage across the sea, southward, to the isles and kingdoms where the church's reach is weaker, perhaps to the distant isles where old magic still breathes." Thomas's shoulders sagged with relief, but Essie's eyes darkened. "Know this, Thomas. The church hunts not only elves, but any who stand with them. Once you set this path, you cannot return." Thomas met her gaze steadily. "I had nothing left here anyway, except her." Ellen cooed softly, curling into him as though she understood. Before dawn, the Folkets Ånd prepared supplies and cloaked Thomas in garments that concealed his face. Essie performed a small ritual, burning herbs and marking both Thomas and Ellen with runes of concealment. "You are now hidden from eyes that seek with hatred," she said, "but the runes will fade with time. Be cautious." Thomas embraced several of the folk in gratitude. Then he stepped toward the mouth of the cavern, Ellen wrapped securely against his chest. Behind him, Essie called out, "Remember, Thomas, our ancestors believed that when the world grows dark, the gods send a spark of light to guide the worthy. Perhaps she is that spark." Thomas looked down at Ellen's peaceful moonlit face. "Then I will protect her," he whispered, "with my life." With that, he stepped into the cold dawn, leaving behind the only home he had ever known. Ahead of him lay exile, danger, unknown shores, and a future shaped not by fate, but by choice. But Thomas felt no fear, for he did not walk alone. Whatever lay ahead of him, he knew that the small bundle he held in his arms, close to his chest, was his to cherish and protect, no matter the cost. The harbor lay hidden between sheer black cliffs, its waters still as ink beneath the early dawn. Only a handful of lanterns glowed along the dock, their light hooded to avoid drawing unwanted eyes. The folk on moved quietly among the shadows, men and women dressed as humble fishermen, though their eyes carried centuries of forbidden wisdom. Thomas held Ellen close, her small hand gripping his tightly beneath the woolen cloak they'd given her. Though disguised as a fisher child, the silvery shimmer of her presence seemed always on the verge of betraying what she truly was. But she had learned, day by day, fear by fear, to dim her glow and quiet her aura. Now she nestled against Thomas's chest with a calm she could not have mustered weeks before. A broad-shouldered woman, with a runic pendant tucked beneath her tunic, met them at the gangplank. "Your passage is ready," she whispered. "The ship is called Hrafnsissel. She sails with the tide. Once you reach the Faroer, you'll be beyond the bishop's reach, at least for a time." Thomas inclined his head. "We owe your order more than we can repay." She offered the faintest smile. "Protect the child. That is payment enough." With those final words, she stepped back into the anonymous shadows of the dock. Thomas carefully walked up the creaking plank and onto the ship. Fishermen bustled about, fastening crates and coiling ropes, but their glances were gentle, aware. A few even gave Ellen small nods of reassurance, as though sensing what she represented: hope, rarity, and grave danger all at once. As the vessel pushed off, the fjord echoed softly with the groaning of wood and the murmur of waves brushing against the hull. Thomas and Ellen remained at the stern, watching Norway shrink into a jagged silhouette beneath the pale morning sky. Thomas said softly, almost to himself, "At least we will be safe." He held Ellen closer to him. The Faroe Islands are new land, fewer eyes, fewer laws, and perhaps, his voice softened, a chance to build something of our own. Ellen leaned against him, silent but trusting, as the Hrafnsissel carried them into the open sea, toward exile, uncertain refuge, and the next chapter of their intertwined fate. Thanks for watching. We hope you enjoyed this tale. Look for part 2 and more new content from Mindset AI coming soon.